Okay, so I thought today we would answer viewer questions. It's been a while since I've done a video like this, and they're always a lot of fun to do. By the way, if you have a question for me, feel free to either put it in the comments below, or you can email me. Just go to my website at rickellis.com and hit the contact link. On the subject of my website, don't forget, my new jiu-jitsu course is out. It's called Old Guy Cheat Code. It contains 4 hours of great material. It's me showing how I like to approach the game of jiu-jitsu, and I think you'll get a lot out of it. Also, I've got some new swag. I've got a new t-shirt design. I've got some new rash guard designs, and I've got a bunch of other stuff that's in progress. My goal is for my swag store to have amazing jiu-jitsu related stuff, so be checking that out, and I appreciate it a lot. How do you drill in order to better retain and execute moves later in open mat? I find myself watching YouTube videos and understanding what's happening, but then draw a mental blank during rolling. Yeah, this is a common dilemma. Every beginner experiences this. I used to experience this, and that is that you drill something and then it's time to spar and you literally forget it. Your mind goes blank. Your game plan goes out the window. Why does that happen? Well, it happens because knowledge is not the same thing as skill. Knowledge just means you know something, but to be skilled at a technique in a dynamic, fast-paced, live sparring scenario means you have to have that technique embedded as a, deeply embedded into your neuromuscular system so it can be executed as an automatic reflex. There's a saying in combat sports, if you're thinking, you're late, and that's absolutely true. You need to develop the sensitivity to feel there's a moment here, and your body has been programmed through repetition to know how to configure itself efficiently in that moment, and that just takes a long time and a lot of training. Is there a way to make it more likely that you can remember a technique after drilling it? The truth is, as a beginner, no, there's not much you're going to be able to do to solve that. Ideally, you would be training in an environment where your coach gives you progressive resistance. You drill cooperatively, and now you're sparring, positionally sparring at 25% resistance. And you never exceed that until your body gets pretty good at executing that thing. And now you move to 50% resistance and you stay there for a while, and then you move to 75%, and then you stay there for a while, and then you go to full resistance. But unfortunately, I've never really seen that in jiu-jitsu environments. Typically, you'll see one of two scenarios. You'll drill and then you'll spar. So you go from low levels of resistance to 100%, or you'll drill and then you'll positionally spar. But here too, the positional sparring ends up being way too intense. People are going way too hard. So you never get that in-between range where the pace is slow enough to allow you to get those repetitions in. And so the question is, what do we do about that? Well, here's, I think, the best strategy when you're a beginner. There's so much to learn that you need to focus your attention on the things that you are reasonably good at. Even as a white belt, you're going to have 1 or 2 or 3 or half a dozen things that you know a little bit better than all these other things. And so even though you're learning new techniques every time you go to class, and you should be a good student, and you should go home and think about those techniques, maybe write them down, visualize them. You should actively try to learn the totality of jiu-jitsu. When it comes time to sparring, it's better if you focus on the things that you're already gaining some proficiency with, so that you can strengthen those things, and those things will then become the core of your game. So you strengthen your strengths, and then once this new technique that you're working on has been embedded enough to where you're reasonably competent with it, okay, now I can grab another technique and begin implementing it and try to incorporate it into my game. And then you grab another technique. And so that becomes the process. I don't really know of a better way, honestly, but I think that it's foolish to try to, if you learn 3 new techniques in class that night, to try to then incorporate those 3 new techniques into your sparring. And then tomorrow you come back and learn 3 more techniques. And now you're trying to incorporate those 3. You're never going to get anywhere doing that. It's much better to focus on a smaller subset of your game and to make consistent effort toward getting good at those things. If your coach does a different technique every class, would you try that move religiously in live sparring, or would you be working on your own stuff? That question is pretty similar to the last one that I answered, so I think I mostly addressed it. So no, I don't think that you should try to incorporate every new thing you're learning from your coach into your game immediately. I think a better strategy is to start by strengthening your strengths and then address the problems you're having on the mat. If, for example, you're getting your guard passed too easily, well, you need to work on guard retention. So that becomes your next project. How long do you work on that? Well, you work on it for a while until you're not getting your guard passed so easily. And then what's the next problem you're facing on the mat? Maybe you keep getting guillotined. Great, I need to go find a guillotine defense. That becomes the next problem that you solve. Because in order to retain information, in order to incorporate a technique into your game, it has to address something specific that you're dealing with. If you're just trying to learn something in the abstract, oh, that's a cool technique, but I literally never find myself in a position where I can execute that technique, then it's just noise. It's not going to give you any real advantage. Start with the things you're good at, find the gaps, the things that you're struggling with, and fill those. And eventually the core of your game will get bigger and bigger and bigger, and the gaps will get smaller and smaller and smaller. And that becomes the never-ending journey of jiu-jitsu, filling the gaps. What would jiu-jitsu look like if there was no belt system like Muay Thai or boxing? In what ways do you think this would be positive and negative? Let me ask you a question. What do the belts in jiu-jitsu get you? Well, the obvious answer is rank. Duh, you get rank. Yeah, but on a fundamental level, what does it mean to have rank? What does that gain you? What does that grant you as a jiu-jitsu practitioner? Well, it gives you status, for one thing, and it gives you the respect of your peers. If you step on the mat as a new blue belt, you used to be a white belt, right? You're going to have more respect. You're going to have more status than you did as a white belt. And it's no different than in the real world. You get a job in a company. Your goal is to rise up through the ranks. You want to scale the ladder, maybe become supervisor someday, maybe become VP, maybe become president. Well, those are ranks, and those things give you status, and they give you the respect of your peers. And unlike the real world, in jiu-jitsu, there's no affirmative action. You have to earn that belt. And here's the thing, the belt demands something in return. The belts in jiu-jitsu aren't just given, they actually demand something in return from you. And what is it that it demands of you? Well, it demands that you represent that rank. If you step on the mat as a blue belt, I guarantee you're going to be scanning the room, looking at all the other blue belts in the room, engaging where you think you stand in relation to all the ones that are there that day. It's what I do. I step on the mat as a black belt. I look for all the other black belts on the mat, and some nights I think, holy cow, I'm going to have to work hard tonight. And so the belt has an expectation that you have to represent it. Therefore, it has a built-in external motivator. I'm a huge fan of external motivation. Internal motivation tends to be fickle, not in the mood to train today. The external motivator can be much more powerful. And so having a belt system, I think, creates an external motivator that keeps you accountable and keeps you working hard because you have to represent it. If there were no belts in jiu-jitsu, would I have that same motivation to represent night in and night out, even on nights when I don't feel like it? And the answer is probably not. And you say, well, in wrestling, they don't have belts. In Muay Thai, in boxing, they don't have belts. No, that is true. They don't. But there's still a mechanism by which you can determine rank. There's still status. There's still all those same elements. If you start high school as a freshman, you don't get to be on the varsity team, generally. You're going to have to be on the JV team for a while. And eventually, with enough work, you'll get selected to be on the varsity team. And with that comes status. With that comes the respect of your peers. You get to wear the jacket. You know, if you're on the varsity team in high school, well, that's kind of the equivalent of a purple belt, let's say. And then you go to college. If you go to a junior college and wrestle, well, that's not the same prestige. That's not going to give you the same rank, the same respect as if you're wrestling for the University of Iowa in a very competitive conference. I guarantee all the guys on the Iowa wrestling team are either brown belts or black belts in terms of wrestling skill. And so I don't think it's fair to say that in those other arts, they don't have a ranking system. They don't have a way to build in that external motivator to keep people, you know, representing. I think all of those sports have that. They just don't have a belt system. So I'm a fan and a believer of the belt system in jiu-jitsu. I think it has really only positives. I can't think of any negatives. I mean, with some additional thought, maybe I could think of something. But to me, it's only a positive to have that built-in motivator and that expression of rank that demands that you now represent that level. Is no-gi BJJ more beneficial than gi BJJ for self-defense? I think the optimal situation would be to train both gi and no-gi. I look at them as two sides of the same coin. They are largely the same, but there's some key differences. The no-gi game, the range is different. It's a tighter game. The gi game, you can play at distance. The no-gi game tends to reward athleticism. The gi game allows you to slow people down more. You don't have to be as athletic. The no-gi game, your escape mechanics don't have to be as good because people are slippery when there's sweat and there's less friction, whereas in the gi, your escape mechanics have to be better. In the no-gi game, your control mechanics have to be on point because, again, it's easier for people to escape, whereas in the gi, there's so much friction and you can grab almost anywhere and have some degree of control over your opponent. So you're going to learn some different things. I think optimally, you would train both. If you told me I couldn't do that, if you said, Rick, you have to choose one for the rest of your life, you can only train gi or no-gi, I think I would choose no-gi. Why? Because everything you can do in a no-gi situation, you can do if people are wearing clothing. And the reverse is not true. Not everything you can do in the gi is applicable if people are wearing a t-shirt and not a jacket. And so I think there's just better carryover to self-defense. And it's a smaller game. It's a more limited game because you don't have all those gripping options. And it really teaches you, I think, in some ways, better control of your opponents because you don't have those grips to rely on. So if push came to shove and you said I could only train one style, I would probably train no-gi, as much as that would make me sad because I love the gi game. And as a nerd, I love all of those options that the gi game gives you. Curious about your relationship with Roy Dean? He has such a unique and flowing style of BJJ. It must have been great to be exposed to this early on before settling on your own style. Yeah, I feel very blessed that I started my jiu-jitsu journey under Roy. I met Roy when he was still a brown belt. Roy and I had a mutual friend named Jimmy. Jimmy was a blue belt and I was a white belt. I trained with Jimmy and a bunch of other white belts at a Taekwondo facility. We were trying to teach ourselves jiu-jitsu. Jimmy was the senior student. We really didn't have a coach in that environment. And so I met Roy through Jimmy, and both Jimmy and I encouraged Roy to move to Oregon where we were living and set up a school there, and eventually Roy did. And so me and Jimmy were his first two students when he opened his school, and I became very good friends with Roy. I mean, to this day, he and I talk on the phone almost daily. We're very close. And we both have a lot of interests in common. We both do media. In a lot of ways, Roy and I have been creative partners over the years in all of Roy's projects. And, you know, he certainly helps me with my projects. So we have a very symbiotic relationship. You know, when you go train at a new school, you hope that your jiu-jitsu teacher is going to be good. And a lot of people don't have a lot of choice. There may only be one school in your city, or there's a couple options, and you hope that the one you select is going to be a really great coach. And although I didn't really know if Roy was going to be a great teacher, there was always a sense, even from the beginning, that he was very special. Roy has an extremely high verbal IQ. He's a master communicator. He is someone that has always been a technician on the mats. He's very, very skilled. He's very precise with his movement. He's very precise with his gripping, his positioning, how he transfers weight, and he's able to communicate those concepts very, very effectively. And really, he has been the most influential person in my own game by far. I've had lots of other influences. I trained directly under Roy until purple belt. As a purple belt, I ended up moving, and I've trained with a lot of people since then. I'm currently training with Clark Gracie, and that dude is a wizard. I'm learning a lot from him. But I think really Roy is my most enduring influence and the person that's had the most significant contribution to my game, and I feel very lucky to have started my journey under him. Can you talk about how to take care of your fingers and not jack them up? My profession requires good use of my hands, and I want to protect them as much as I can. I think most people, if they train for a significant period of time, are going to develop some problems with their fingers. I have on these two fingers what in judo they call cauliflower knuckle, where the knuckles are much bigger than they used to be, and on this hand as well. It's really these two interior fingers that get the most abuse in jiu-jitsu. This is the bulk of our gripping. Power comes from those fingers. The index finger doesn't do as much. The pinkies don't do quite as much. When you pocket grip, yeah, the pinky can be involved as well, but really it's those interior fingers that get the most use when you grip. And so I'm a fan of doing two things. Number one, taping my fingers. And number two, I get these sleeves, these little neoprene sleeves, and wear them. I'll wear them on both hands. These are from a company called Luta Gear. I don't know if they're still around or not, but I know that these types of neoprene sleeves are real common. I'm a fan of binding the two fingers together. You don't really need a lot of finger articulation in jiu-jitsu, so putting them together helps really protect them much more effectively, in my opinion. And these days, honestly, I will tape my fingers and then put the sleeve on top of the finger tape just to give me that extra reinforcement, because my fingers are starting to kind of hurt a lot and I want to continue to protect them and not be arthritic in the coming years. Number one, what do you think about the ecological approach? And two, what would it take to get you or Roy to Austin, Texas? To be honest, I am not your best resource to learn about the ecological approach. It's a term that is increasing in popularity. I see it mentioned now and again in some of the places where I lurk online, but I know very little about it other than it's a methodology for skill development, but I'm not your guy to learn about that. As far as what would it take to get Roy or me down to Austin, Texas, well, Roy teaches seminars all over the world, and I get opportunities to teach here and there as well. So what would it take? Well, it takes money. You have to put a group of people together at a seminar rate that's high enough to afford accommodations, travel, and the instructor fees. So everything's possible, but it does take money. Do you think older players should take breaks for recovery? Yeah, I do. I remember many years ago reading an article by Dan John. Dan John is a well-known strength coach. He's a very good writer. He has a great book called Easy Strength if you're looking for a program that's ultra, ultra simple. And in this article years ago, his recommendation to older athletes, now he was talking about strength athletes, but I think it applies pretty universally, is every 6 to 8 weeks, take a week off and do nothing. And if you think about what we put our bodies through in a jiu-jitsu context, you're going to class 3-4 nights a week, maybe you're doing some strength work on the off days. That's a huge amount of physical output, and we need to give ourselves a break from that periodically to avoid injuries, to let some of those aches and pains heal, and just to clear your mind as well. Sometimes you get so There's a little bit of a burnout that can happen if you're just keeping your nose to the grindstone day in and day out for extended periods of time. So it's great to take a break, and I recommend that. Besides stepping on the mat for the first time and becoming a white belt, which jiu-jitsu belt requires you to overcome the biggest hurdles? I think the purple belt is the hardest belt in jiu-jitsu. It's the one that takes the longest, or it can take the longest. Some people think the blue belt's the hardest, but really the blue belt is kind of cut and dry in terms of what you need to know technically and in terms of how effective you need to be on the mat as a blue belt. But a blue belt is still kind of a one-dimensional practitioner. The purple belt needs to become a multi-dimensional practitioner. You're someone that needs to tap into momentum and combinations, and that's much more sophisticated than what you have to do at blue belt. And the journey from blue to purple is generally longer than the journey from white to blue belt. And so that's why I think the purple belt is the hardest. Purple to brown is relatively straightforward. It's one of refinement, and brown to black is also one of refinement and simplification. And so purple is the one that requires kind of that transformational change in your game. So I think that's the hardest belt.